Reading through the Bible in 1 year, January 5th, Genesis chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5, Ezra chapter 5, and Acts chapter 5. Now, there's a lot of names here. There's a lot of names. But the interesting thing is partially the names, but also the length of the lives of these people. Again, remember, we're talking about people who were, as we already said before, genetically pure. So they didn't have any of our genetic defects that started slowly working their way in because of the curse over time. But along with this, it was also a different environment then. God allowed people to live much longer, and then he eventually, after the flood, he started shortening their lives to about 120 years maximum. So that's what we see. But a neat thing to see here is the fact that a lot of these people lived long enough to see Adam. Like generations upon generations upon generations of people were able to go and talk to Adam about when he walked with God and ask him questions about that. It's a really cool thing to see. There's some charts out there that explain it on the internet. But just letting you know, it's a very cool thing to see. Also, there's a lot of notes on this. I mean, a lot of notes, but I'm not going to read through all of the notes because they are very, very long. Let's go ahead and begin. This is the document containing the family records of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Again, that's important. It comes up later. He created them male and female, and when they were created, he blessed them and called them mankind. Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. This does not mean he's the first child. It's just a note that this is the person that we're referencing here. And you're going to see that a lot. Seth is going to have his own children, and Seth's children will have other children. And it's going to mention the name of one of those. And then one of those children that they've had, and how old they were when they started having children. That's how this is working, kind of like a ladder working its way down. This person had this child at this age, and then they lived X amount of years. Then that child had a child at X age, and then they lived X amount of years, and they had a child at X age, and they lived X amount of years. You'll see how it works out. But let's go ahead and get started. So he named him Seth, and Adam lived 800 years after he fathered Seth, and he fathered sons and daughters. So Adam's life lasted 930 years, then he died. Seth was 105 years old when he fathered Enosh. Seth lived 807 years after he fathered Enosh, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Seth's life lasted 912 years, and he died. Enosh was 90 years old when he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived 815 years after he fathered Kenan, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Enosh's life lasted 905 years, then he died. Kenan was 70 years old when he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived 840 years after he fathered Mahalalel, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Kenan's life lasted 910 years. Then he died. Mahalalel was 65 years old when he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived 830 years after he fathered Jared, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Mahalalel's life lasted 895 years, then he died. Yeah, sorry, just checking notes. I don't want to scroll past because it'll move the whole thing. Where were we? Jared. Jared was 162 years when he when he fathered Enoch. Jared lived 800 years after he fathered Enoch. Jared lived, I already said that, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Jared's life lasted 962 years, and then he died. Enoch was 65 years old when he fathered Methuselah. After he fathered Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years, and it fathered other sons and daughters, and Enoch's life lasted 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was not there because God took him out of the world. He never died. There's two people who never died. It's him and also Elijah. Man. All right, let's keep going. So Methuselah was 187 years old when he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived 782 years after he fathered Lamech, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Methuselah's life lasted 969 years when he died. Lamech was 182 years old when he fathered a son, and he named him Noah, saying, "This one will bring us relief from the agonizing labor of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." Lamech lived 595 years after he fathered Noah, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Lamech's life lasted 777 years, then he died. Noah was 500 years old, and he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And tomorrow we get into more detail on him and his life and information related to that. If you've ever read the Bible or attended Sunday school at any point, you know who Noah is. It's a fun story. Let's move on to Matthew chapter 5. And again, if you're following along, if this is your first time going through here, you will see some of my notes are colored. The reason for that is because I'm following specific themes or specific ideas through them. So you'll see something like this as we're going through the Beatitudes. Now, I'm promising you I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. Beatitudes is one of the things that I could preach about for weeks on weeks on weeks. There's a lot of really good detail in here. I don't mean like one Sunday at a time. I mean every day. I could do it for weeks. So we're going to do our best to keep this short. Now, the Beatitudes themselves and the Sermon on the Mount really covers 3 chapters, chapter 5, 6, and 7. At the end of chapter 5, we get the scariest mention in the entire book. A brief thing to note here, as he's talking to his disciples, and other people come and talk to him, but for the most part, he's talking to the disciples when he says all of these things. Also, there are a lot of confusing things that have been said about this entire section, the Sermon on the Mount, but also about what Jesus is saying and to whom. I've heard people say that, well, Jesus is clearly speaking to the entire crowd when he says, when he goes over the Beatitudes. In fact, the note here also says the same, but there's no distinction here in the people he's talking to. It says in in verse 1, that he saw the crowds and he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, well, which them is he speaking to? Is it to the crowds, the random people who are there, or is it to his disciples? I think it's both, but I think it's directed at the disciples. Also, a quick note, the disciples themselves are not just the 12 apostles whom Jesus chose. In fact, he hasn't even directly chosen those people yet. Instead, it's the throng of people who follow after him. And it grows very, very large, and eventually Jesus whittles that down quite a bit to about 120 people in all through the time of his death and resurrection. It knocks down about 120 people. That said, let's get going. So when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, which is also a normal way for a teacher to speak then, instead of like it is now where everybody sits in church and the pastor stands up, or the elder, the one who is speaking would sit down and everyone else would stand up to hear what's being said. And after this happened, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs, it belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth." This is exactly opposite of what the religious leaders at the time were telling the people. You had to be ambitious. You had to go out and do things for God, that kind of thing. But this seems kind of strange to read it, doesn't it? God is saying, blessed are the small and the weak things of the earth, because they're honored by God. Also, you can follow a lot of these things with the terms for sin. Blessed are the poor in spirit over their sin. Why? Because they're repentant, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn over their sin, for they will be comforted in the work of what Jesus is doing. Blessed are the humble over their sin, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger for and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Now, again, to the people who are hearing this would be weird. Why would it be persecuted because of righteousness? But they don't. This is kind of a callback to what happened with Job, where he was righteous before God and God allowed him to be pursued by Satan so that Satan could sift him like wheat, as he did with Peter. But this is also strange for them to hear, because a lot of the people believe that if you do well, then God will give you blessings. This is also a common thing seen in a lot of the health and wealth churches. Remember, we're not promised good things in this life. We're promised persecution and struggle. Why? Because our focus shouldn't be on the things we get in this life. It should instead be on the things we get from Christ in heaven and in time to come. That is our hope, not earthly things. You are blessed when they insult you, when they persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Remember, he's a brand new teacher. A lot of people don't know a lot of what he's saying, and this is his kind of opening salvo against the people who are there. He's warning them ahead of time, things are going to get hard. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven, not on earth. For that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, Jesus kind of warns them here in this section. And the next two things, he warns them ahead of time. First, giving them their commission, right? Their job they're going to have to do. And the second one, the second pericope here, he kind of focuses their attention and gives them a bit of a warning. He says things are going to get bumpy from here on out. First, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and hides it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light so shine before others, that they may see your good works and give glory to, not you, but your Father who is in heaven, because they can recognize these are not things done through you or through your own power. Here comes the warning. Don't think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not the smallest letter or a stroke of the letter will pass away from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the last of these commandments and teaches others to do the same, well, he will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness that surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. That sounds scary. We have to be righteous. We have to do these things on our own. Yes, this is Jesus explaining the gospel. Now, up to this point, the scribes, the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the time had been slowly shaving off the hard parts of the law. Why? To make it palatable, so that people could think, oh, I can do this. Because they saw God as a God of laws, and they saw God as the one who said, keep this entire list of commandments and do all of these things, because if you don't do all of these things, then I will not be pleased with you. So that's what they saw. That's what they understood it to mean. However, Jesus is calling them back away from these reshaped commandments and calls them to the truth of what the commandment is. And there's something interesting to see as we go through each of these. But the biggest thing that he says is, because remember what he's doing is he is in the place of God, because he is God, saying this is how things are. First, what's a good way to put this? The religious leaders of the time, and even for generations beforehand, they wouldn't come right out and say, well, this is what God said and this is what the law says. They would say, well, Rabbi so-and-so previously has said this thing, so we believe what he says. So they wouldn't refer to the word of God directly, because they didn't want to accidentally speak in the place of God and then screw something up and then be found to be blaspheming. It's actually kind of fair, and I understand that. However, Jesus is speaking directly to them. He's going to tell them, you have heard it said of old, or you've had people tell you this. But again, they've reinterpreted these things to kind of make it more palatable for the people so that they would think that they could do it on their own. But Jesus is giving it to them straight. He's saying, and he's going to reveal to them that it's not just the actions we commit, but it's the intentionality of the heart. It's the attitude of the heart. It's our thought life that God treats as if we had actually really been doing all of these things physically in the flesh. Let's begin. Remember, he also leads this section with the line that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, who they thought to be the most holy people on earth, you will never get into heaven. And he concludes this entire chapter with the most damning phrase of all, and we'll get there. Verse 21. You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder. No, it's not do not kill. Killing is okay if it's a righteous killing. It's do not murder. And whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you this, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. See what he's doing? He's not allowing it to be palatable. He's not allowing the people to say, oh, well, I just won't kill my neighbor. That'll be fine. He's showing them the truth of what it actually means. So if you are offering your gift on the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, you've done something wrong, leave your gift there in front of the altar and first go and be reconciled with your brother or sister. Then come and offer your gift. Reach a settlement quickly with your adversary while you're on the way with them to the court, or your adversary will hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. Oh, this one's easy, right? If you're married, don't sleep around. And if you're not married, nothing for you to worry about. You can't commit adultery, right? Remember, he's giving them the straight law directly as it was originally intended to be read and understood. Jesus, God in the flesh, says, I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully with lustful intent in his heart, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So when you're watching porn, or when you see a cute girl go walking down the street, and you kind of get these thoughts going right in the back of your mind, or if you're a girl and you see a hot guy going by, and you just start playing around a little bit in the playground of your mind, thinking about, oh, well, yeah, that'd be kind of fun, whatever. God counts that as if you had actually done the act. See what he's doing? This is why he gave them the warning ahead of time. This is why he told them, buckle up. This is going to get rough. He goes into more detail. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. He's not literally telling you to carve out your eyeballs or to cut off your hands if this is an issue for you. But what he's saying is this is so important. This is maximally important. You need to stop whatever it is you're doing. You need to get away from whatever it is that's leading you to do this. Verse 31. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written certificate, a notice of divorce. But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in the case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. This sounds weird, right? Let me explain it. So, marriage is not just a covenant between a man and a woman, or a man and a woman in the courts. That's how we typically see it today. It's, a guy goes and, gets the paperwork from the judge, and they might fill it out there, or they might have a big elaborate ceremony. But the end result is that they're simply getting married. And then if they decide later on to have, that they just aren't the same people anymore, and that it's not working out, they decide to end their marriage. Well, in today's age, it's nothing more than them just, kind of finishing up, or they can handle it in an afternoon if they so desire, if they don't want to drag it through the courts and do a big deal. But God, the author of marriage, created man and woman to complement each other. And because of that, our spouses are our partners, literally meant for life. And because of this, our marriage isn't simply between you and your spouse, or you and your spouse in the courts, but it's you and your spouse and God. So if you two, on this little triangle here, decide to sever that relationship, you're still connected in God's eyes. So, what we see here, and the reasoning behind this, is because God still sees you as married, despite the fact you decided you're not married for whatever reason, and you go off to do whatever it is you're going to do. Well, when you start sleeping around, or when you marry someone else, in God's eyes, you're still married, so you're committing adultery. And your spouse, when she goes off and gets married to someone else, well, now she's committing adultery, and she's leading her new husband to commit adultery as well, because you're still married in God's eyes. That's the point being made. Verse 33, again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it's God's throne, or by the earth, because it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, Do not resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if one slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, this is, again, an important thing to note. If you're being slapped on the right cheek, right? Think about how they have to do that. Is that a punch? No. They have to backhand you for that. So the point being made is if you are offended by somebody, or if somebody tries to take something from you, let it go. There's nothing wrong here. Now, if somebody's actively trying to kill you, you're perfectly safe to defend yourself and others. There's nothing wrong in that. But what he's saying is when somebody offends you or tries to take your stuff, just give it to them. What's it matter? God will make sure that you get back whatever you need. Let them take whatever it is. As we see in verse 40, as for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, give him your coat also. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, well, go with him too. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise, his sun, God owns it all, to rise on both the evil and the good, and sends rain both on the righteous and on the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward is that? Don't even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, well, what are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even Gentiles do the same? And here's that line I told you about. This is the one that I warned you about at the very beginning. The scariest term in this entire section, where he's taking the law of God and opening it up for them so that they can see it and understand it clearly. He opens it by saying, your righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. You must be perfect in everything. Then he gives them the exact law and tells them that it's the intentionality of your heart. It's the intentionality of your thoughts. God counts all of these things as if you have actually done them. God cares about all of them to a supreme level. Then he wraps it up with this line: be perfect. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. You want to get to heaven on your own terms? Cool. It's really not that big of a deal. All you have to do is from the moment you are conceived until the moment of your death, your thought life, your actions, your words, everything you do has to be perfect. And not perfect according to the scribes and the Pharisees and their standard that they've created by shaving off the hard parts of this law, but according to the true intentions of this law. This is Romans. This is simply proving, this is Romans 3, proving that nobody can be perfect before God, that we must turn to him and trust him as the one who can do all of these things for us. All right, let's move on. Ezra, chapter 5. Again, that was me being short with that. I am super happy I got through that without doing a full hour. We're good to go. All right. I'm going to roll back a little bit here. So, again, they had just recently been told that they should not do any work within the kingdom to rebuild Jerusalem or to rebuild the wall, and especially not to rebuild the temple, because there was a letter that was handed to them from King Artaxerxes after the people who lived around them got offended about the fact that they were rebuilding the temple. So they sent a letter to King Artaxerxes and told him to do a quick check and just tell them they're not allowed to do this work, even though King Cyrus had originally said for them to do it. This is where we get to verse 24 of chapter 4. Now, the construction of God's house in Jerusalem had stopped and remained at a standstill until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. But when the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Jerusalem and Judah in the name of the God of Israel who was over them, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, began to rebuild God's house in Jerusalem, and the priests of God's were with them, helping them. Well, at that time, Tattenai, governor of the region west of the Euphrates River, and Shethar-Bozenai and their colleagues came to the Jews and asked, hold on, who gave you the order to rebuild this temple and finish this structure? They also asked them, what are the names of the workers? Just help me out here for a second. I'm going to write down the names. Who are the people who are constructing this building? But God was watching over the Jewish elders, and these men wouldn't stop them until the report was sent to Darius, so they could receive written instructions about this matter. This is the text of the letter that Tattenai, the governor of the region west of the Euphrates River, Shethar-Bozenai, and their colleagues, the officials in the region, sent to King Darius. They sent him a report written as follows. Again, they're tattling. To King Darius, let it be known to the king that we went to the house of the great God in the province of Judah. It is being built with cut stones, and its beams are being set in the walls, and this work is being done diligently and succeeding through the people's efforts. So we questioned the elders and asked, who gave you the order to rebuild this temple and to finish this structure? We also asked for their names so that we could write down the names of their leaders for your information. This is the reply they gave us. We are the servants of the God of the heavens and the earth, in that creation God. And we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. That'd be Solomon. But since our ancestors angered the God of the heavens, he handed them over to King Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of King Cyrus of Babylon, he issued a decree to rebuild the house of God. He also took from the temple in Babylon the gold and silver articles of God's house that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the from the temple in Jerusalem, and carried them to the people, to the temple in Babylon. He released them from the temple in Babylon to a man named Sheshbazzar, the governor by the appointment of King Cyrus. And Cyrus told him, take these articles and put them in the temple in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its original site. Then this same Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundation of God's house in Jerusalem. It has been under construction from that time until now, but it has not yet been completed. So that's what they say. So if it pleases the king, let a search of the royal archives in Babylon be conducted to see if it's true that a decree was issued by King Cyrus to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. And let the king's decision regarding this matter be sent to us. Again, they didn't believe it, but that's the facts. It's okay. It's super cool. Let's go on to Acts chapter 5. So previously, we had just read a section where the people are selling their proceeds, or selling not their proceeds, but selling the things that they have, right? Kind of leftover things that they have, or if they have like an extra house or any property, they would sell that property and give the money to the church, so the church can distribute it to any who have need. This isn't like a welfare state or something like that, and it certainly isn't socialism or communism, which comes at the end of a spear or a rifle. What's happening here instead is that they have, the best way to put it is this. When you become a Christian, right, when you abandon the faith of your fathers in Judaism, Because remember, all of the early converts were Jews. When that happens, you are cut off from your entire family. You're cut off from the temple. You're cut off from your places of work. Excuse me. You're cut off from any way that you could buy or sell. The only people who will sell to you at a markup, because they can do so because you're no longer a Jew to them. You've rejected the God of Israel in their eyes. And so because of this, people who are becoming Christians were being forced out of their homes. They had nobody to help them. So the church saw this need, and they started to take care of the needs of the people there. And some of the Christians, in a free will offering, they weren't compelled to do so by the church or the elders or anybody else. What they were doing is they were basically just selling whatever they had and giving it to the church and letting the church be the one to decide where the money goes. That's where we are so far. And there was just a mention of Barnabas, which is translated as son of encouragement. He sold a field that he owned, and he brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Well, there's a lot of people who are in the church. These are probably new converts, or people who are what we call false converts, where they believe that they're Christians, or they're just kind of following along with it, right? But they aren't true Christians. And you'll find this a lot in your own church. People who are just getting into it emotionally, but there's nothing really to hold them there. These are the ones who Jesus will later tell us about, who, when the cares of the world start coming in, they just leave. Because it's easier for them to just go back to what they were doing. A man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. That's perfectly fine. They can do that. And the money at that point is up to them to do with it whatever they want, right? However, seeing all of these people giving all of the money to the church, they want to appear to be doing the same, but they're keeping some back for themselves. And however, he kept back part of the proceeds with his wife's knowledge and brought a portion of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. Ananias, said Peter, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the proceeds of the land? Wasn't it yours while you possessed it? And after it was sold, wasn't it at your disposal so you could do whatever you wanted? Why is it that you planned this thing in your heart? You have not lied to people, but to God. When he heard those words, Ananias dropped dead. And a great fear came upon all who heard of this. And the young men got up, wrapped up his body, carried him out, and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Tell me, Peter asked, did you sell the land for this price? She said, yes, for that price. Then Peter said to her, why did you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. And instantly she dropped dead at his feet. When the young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Then fear came upon the whole church and on all who heard of these things. Many signs and wonders were being done among the people through the hands of the apostles. They were all together in Solomon's colonnade, and no one dared to join them, but the people spoke well of them. Believers were added to the Lord in increasing numbers, both multitudes of men and women. And as a result, they would carry the sick out into the streets and lay them on cots and mats so that when Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. In addition, a multitude came together from the towns surrounding Jerusalem, beginning with the sick and those who were tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all healed. Then the high priest rose up, he and all who were with him, who belonged to the party of the Sadducees. Again, these are people who don't believe in miracles. They don't believe in angels. They don't believe in resurrection from the dead. And they were filled with jealousy. So they arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. But an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail during the night and brought them out and said, "Go and stand in the temple and tell the people all about this life." Hearing this, they entered the temple at daybreak and began to teach. When the high priest and those who were with him arrived, they convened the Sanhedrin, the full council of the Israelites, and sent orders to the jail to have them brought. But when the servants got there, they did not find them in the jail, so they returned and reported, "We found the jail securely locked, with the guards standing in front of the doors, but when we opened them, we found no one inside." As the captain of the temple police and the chief priests heard these things, they were baffled about them, wondering what would come of this. Someone came and reported to them, "Look, the men who you put in jail are standing in the temple and teaching the people." Then the commander went with the servants and brought them in without force, because they were afraid that the people might stone them. This is why they do these things in the dead of night. After they brought them in, they had them stand before the Sanhedrin, and the high priest asked, "Didn't we strictly order you not to teach in this name? Look, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." Peter and the apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than people. The God of our ancestors raised up Jesus, whom you had murdered by hanging him on a tree." It's like, yeah, you're the ones who killed him. "God exalted this man to his right hand as ruler and savior, to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins." John 14:6. We are witnesses of these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. Well, when they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law who was respected by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered the men to be taken outside for a little while. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, be careful what you are about to do to these men." Some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a group of about 400 men rallied to him, and he was killed, and his followers were dispersed, and it came to nothing. After this man, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and attracted a following. He also perished, and his followers were all scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, stay away from these men and leave them alone. For if this plan or this work is of human origin, it'll fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You may even be found fighting against God. And they were persuaded by him. After they called in the apostles and had them flogged, they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and released them. They went out from the presence of the Sanhedrin, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to be treated shamefully on behalf of the name. This is a callback to what we just read in the beginning of Matthew chapter 5, where God or Jesus clearly promises that we don't have joy and cupcakes and rainbows and puppy dogs to receive in this life. The Christian life isn't a bed of roses or something super comfortable for us to just embrace and feel super loved in. It's a life of persecution and struggle against our own sin, against our own flesh that desires to pursue sin. But it's also a struggle that we have with the world, because the world hates us because we represent God, and God represents truth. He reveals their sin to them, and they don't want anything to do with that. So this is why they were happy, because they got to but they got to be persecuted as Jesus had said. It was more of a testament to them that they were doing the right thing. Now, if you're a jerk to people and people treat you like you're a jerk, that's not persecution. That's you getting your just rewards for being a jerk. But if you are seeking God truthfully, if you're not out there just, bashing people all the time and attacking people for what you perceive to be their lack of faith, if you're serving God truthfully with a true heart, and even in that you are persecuted, you can count that as a blessing. Verse 42, every day in the temple and in various homes, they continued teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Again, good news in Greek is gospel. All right, that's all for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold, the word of the Lord.